Hi guys, welcome back. Welcome to Paradox of Losing Cycle channel. As you guys have seen, we have created a new logo for the channel. It's called Cycle GF. Cycle stands for the losing cycle that exists in gambling as well as in trading and in investment in different areas of risk taking. That's our focus. Our focus is mainly on the cycle of life. The cycle of different areas of risk taking and how to address it. And the GF stands for gamble free. So that's our main goal. Our goal is to stay gamble free within this cycle of life. So that's how we created this brand called Cycle GF, and of course Paradox symbolizes the dragons. The dragon, it symbolizes a contradiction between the power and destruction, and as well as it symbolizes in terms of confusion, in terms of between two contradictory forces, right? And that's what we are naming it as paradox. So the paradox of losing cycle. So the branding is called Cycle GF, which is GF stands for gamble free. All right. So in this video, we're going to be talking about is there are two dragons, basically the emotion and the rationality. So the emotional and rational dragons. What are they, and how they form the inner conflict in gambling? This video is going to be very interesting. I think this is going to highlight on key issues that many gamblers are facing. Um, Sort of like many of them, they say that they don't know what happens to them when they are gambling. Sometimes, they turn into a different person that they don't recognize. The gamblers sometimes they don't know who they are while they're gambling. Sometimes they make a decision and they feel like helpless. They feel like they are out of control. Sometimes this urge and impulsive decision comes out of nowhere, especially when there is a loss. But also sometimes when there is no loss, sometimes a sudden impulsive action takes place, and the gambler is caught off guard, and the gambler he doesn't know who he is or who she is, and all of a sudden you know they go into a ruin, and after they go into a ruin, the aftermath, they reflect back and say like who they were and who were they. I mean, who how and why they acted in a specific behavior. They have no clue. So we're going to address this problem specifically by describing this thing psychologically and physiologically, I mean, medically, in order to explain this phenomenon. It's a war between the emotional self and the rational self. We call them, dragons, which is basically inside your or inside one's self. So let's get started. So, um, this is about a split between rational and emotional selves. Many struggle with an experience of rational and emotional selves as a split between persons in oneself while gambling. There is a complex interplay between the rational and emotional selves during gambling, where emotional self is sensitive to losses and can override rational thinking, while the rational self is more sensitive to potential gain rather than losses. Okay? Emotional self triggers impulses that can override your rational self, leading to impulsive and potentially very harmful behavior known as loss aversion. While the rational self takes a backseat when there is a stress or panic due to losses and make rational decision under a controlled psychological environment, calculating the potential gains. So you can see the difference now. The role of emotional self and the role of rational self. There are two different roles. Emotional self basically takes charge when there is a panic button, when there is a stressful situation, in order to regain control emotionally. And the emotional self takes over any rational decision making process, by the way, in that situation. The rational self doesn't have any power or strength to make any decision when oneself is under an extreme stressful situation due to a loss. The rational self takes over and makes a decision on for a potential gain through calculated fashion once your psychological environment is stable. So do not rely on your rational self to act on when there is a loss or when there is a stressful situation, even a minor. Okay? The rational self doesn't come to rescue. So your emotional self is at play at that time. So that's why you don't have any control over your rational self at the time of panic. So let's explain this now in more detail. So, first of all, acknowledging and accepting the existence of these two aspects of yourself when gambling is the first step towards controlling the damage while gambling. When fear or stress arises due to a loss, emotional self challenges any irrational thoughts or beliefs that may fuel impulsivity and irrational behavior. Emotions are driven by the desire for immediate gratification, which can be particularly potent during gambling activities. The prospect of winning money or experiencing the rush of excitement due to losses can override any rational considerations of risk and probability. Gambling activates the brain's reward system, releasing neurotransmitters such as dopamine that are associated with pleasure and reinforcement. This can create a powerful psychological incentive to high-risk gambling, even in the face of potential losses. So, the emotional self is often more sensitive to the fear of loss than the rational self is to the potential for gain. This phenomenon, known as loss aversion, can lead individuals to take greater risks or engage in irrational behavior in an attempt to avoid losses, if it means risking further losses in the process. Now we're going to go into detail in terms of navigation of what's happening in the inner self. So navigating the inner conflict between emotional and rational selves. So let's suppose now you are having a loss. So when you are gambling, you're doing perfectly fine, and then suddenly you go into a loss. So now the whole thing gets triggered between now the fight between the rational self and the emotional self will start. The internal conflict between them will start. All right. So the rational self, guided by logic and reason, recognizes the need to stop gambling after experiencing a significant loss. It understands the importance of setting limits and protecting your bankroll to avoid further financial harm. However, the emotional self, driven by impulses, desires, and the thrill of gambling, is reluctant to give up the possibility of winning back what was lost. Okay, so impulse, and then this step leads to impulsivity and urgency. So, despite the rational self's attempts to intervene, the emotional self may feel a sense of urgency and impulsivity to continue gambling in an attempt to recoup losses quickly. This urgency can be fueled by emotions such as frustration, desperation, or a desire to regain a sense of control over the situation. And that leads to loss aversion. So the emotional self now may be particularly sensitive to the fear of loss, known as loss aversion, which can override rational decision making processes. The prospect of losing the initial investment and walking away empty handed can be emotionally distressing, leading the emotional self to take greater risk in a last ditch effort to avoid accepting the loss. Then the momentary lapse of control takes over. In the heat of the moment, when emotions are heightened and impulses are strong, individuals may experience a momentary lapse of control where the emotional self overrides the rational self's attempts to intervene. This can lead to impulsive actions such as going all in, despite knowing deep down that it's not a wise decision. Then comes the aftermath. So, after the decision is made and the consequences are realized, individuals may experience feeling of regret, guilt, or shame, particularly if the outcome is negative. This cycle of emotional distress can further exacerbate the conflict between the rational and emotional selves, making it even more challenging to regain control over gambling behavior in the future. So, when there is a big loss in this case, what happens is that the rational self will stop trusting the emotional self in the future. There will be some sort of distrust between the two selves. In this case, whenever you attempt to gamble again, this distrust becomes very visible between the rational self and the emotional self. The rational self basically it regrets. It basically is trying to convince the emotional self not to bet higher, but the emotional self doesn't take care of what's the rational self is saying. So there will be a constant distrust between the two selves, which makes it even more potent as a behavior by the individual if he engages into gambling. So this is where knowing oneself that there is a big issue between the two selves, the rational and the emotional self, is advisable not to engage into any gambling activity or margin trading or forex trading or any type of risky activity because there is a conflict between the emotional self and the rational self, and one needs to get help, professional help, in order to adjust this psychologically. So the individual must regain control, must regain trust that there is a perfect balance and harmony between the rational self and the emotional self. The two have to work in harmony. The emotional self must respect the rational self. And the rational self must be equipped with the tools and decision making power and experience in order to make the right decisions, in order to make the right decision towards the gain. But the problem is that basically the rational self doesn't really have much power over the loss, except that it can advise the emotional self not to take the risk, to have a stop loss, and in order to basically is more of a passive role of rational self in case of losses. In case of losses, emotional self has more power to influence impulsive behavior. Now that's a problem. But the two have to work in harmony, and that will require a lot of mindful thinking practices and sort of re engineering your mental wire and frameworks in order to, forcefully make the two to respect each other and work in harmony. Okay? So if you note that the two are not in harmony, you should not gamble at all. Stay away. Because your emotional self can be very potent and can take you into very deep damage and ruin. Now, this holds true not just in gambling, but if this is true that your emotional self is not in harmony with your rational self, this can also impact your other areas in your life, with your relationship with your wife, with your husband, with your parents, with friends, and so forth, and with your colleagues. And so knowing this, the conflict between the two will help you succeed in your life. So now I made this video to clarify on this issue because our next video will be talking more into the paradigms. But knowing this element of rational self and emotional self and how they work is very, very important in order to understand our following videos in paradigms. And thank you guys. And I really appreciate if you guys can subscribe to our channel and press the like button as well. And we're looking forward to seeing you guys in our next video. Cheers.